is if you feel that I'm going too fast, do let Alan know in the chat and he'll interrupt me and slow me down, because there's nothing worse than being rushed through information. Okie doke. Sorry, Alan, I'm just trying to, it's not allowing me to share my sound right now.
Oh.
Yes, you did in our little check-in, didn't it? But it won't let me click that button for some reason.
It was fine before.
Yeah, do you think, I don't know why that would be.
Um,
Well, let's just see. I'll just do another test run with you now. Apologies to everybody for this.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's just see if we can hear this.
I would say prepare.
Yep, that's fine.
Oh, you can. It's just not letting me click that particular button. But okay, all right. Thank you very much. Okay, well, let's get started. As Alan said, I'm here to talk to you about integrating students' culture into the language classroom. All will be revealed. And in this webinar, what I hope to do is the following things. So just have a read. And how I hope to do this is by interacting with you and drawing not only on my experience, but your experiences using the chat function, listening to other teachers. I've got recordings of other teachers and recordings of students, and looking at material and activities. So I'm hoping the session will be more practical than theoretical, but we'll be drawing the key sort of maxims or tenets behind some of the activities out as we go along. So let's get started. So the question I'd like to start with is, who am I and who are you? Because this question really gets to the heart of what we mean by culture. So I think I'd like to play a little game, and I'd like you to be ready to type your answers into the chat. So you can see here, I've got 6 hexagons. And in the center, it says me. So I'm going to reveal each hexagon at a time, and it will have some information about me. And in the chat, I'd like you to respond and say, yes, me too, or no, actually, I'm blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So tell me whether the information is the same for you, or if it's different, tell me what's different for you. So let's get started. Here is the first piece of information about me. I am female and I identify as a female, so that's called cisgender. How about you? Second bit, I am a granddaughter, a daughter, and a sister. How about you? I'm an English language teacher and I love it. I'm also a trainer of teachers, and I'm a professional development manager in the school where I work, International House London. How about you? I'm Generation X, which means I was born quite a long time ago, approximately late 60s, early 70s. So this year I'm going to be 50. What generation do you come from? I also identify with a group called the LGBTQ plus group. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer plus. How about you? And lastly, I'm a humanist. I identify with the group of people who call themselves humanists, which means that rather than particularly being religious in any sense, I believe in rational thinking and engaging in society in a tolerant manner. So these are things about me that may or may not be similar to things about you. And I can't actually see the chat, so it's a bit of a mystery right now. But there's maybe something that I haven't told you about me. What do you think it is? What do you think I haven't told you about me? Ah, yes. Is that Enas, if I pronounce it correctly? I haven't told you where I'm from. So in actual fact, it's a bit of a difficult one for me to answer. I was born in the UK for sure. I grew up in London, partially, then Manchester, partially, then Scotland, partially. So I always find that a bit of a difficult question to answer. I suppose overall I identify as British, but there's part of me that identifies with the north of this country. A lot of my heart is there, and part of me that identifies with the south of this country, and part of me is there. So these are some things about me. And if we look at them, they're all cultural groupings. And so, and there are more, perhaps. For example, when I was younger, I used to be a punk. I don't know if you know what a punk is. Like, I had a little Mohican hairstyle, and it was red. So I belonged to that cultural group as well. And so if we think about culture, often people say, well, I'm from Italy, that's my culture. That's a very narrow view of culture. The reality is, as we can see here, we are all simultaneously members of multiple cultural groups. And in a sense, that's quite significant, because what it means is your learners, every individual learner in a class is a member of multiple cultural groups. And we can take advantage of that in our lessons in order to get our learners exploring perhaps their own culture and cultures in the classroom. So let's just take a little look at what this might look like in the classroom, right? So we have here our diagram, and we could give this out to the learners, and we've got empty spaces in the diagram, and we could give them the following prompts and ask them to write short answers in the hexagons. So maybe just take a little look and think, what would your answers be to some of these prompts? So let's imagine the scenario. You've given this to your learners and they've written their short answers in the prompts. And then what they're doing is you maybe pair or group them up, or perhaps you organize a class mingle, and they show their hexagon card with their prompts, and they maybe guess which prompt the answer refers to, and then they ask for more information. And in the process of doing that, they will be asking each other about the different cultural membership groups that they belong to and sharing their own culture. I did a similar task with my learners. Actually, it was maybe a year or so ago. And then afterwards, I got them to summarize in groups the similarities and differences they had amongst themselves in order to further define, like in a Venn diagram, what they have in common, culturally speaking. And then I got them to prepare questions for other students in other groups that they would like to ask to explore each other's cultures more. So what they did was they recorded their interviews and then they put them on Flipgrid, which I don't know if you've ever heard of Flipgrid, but it's a place where you can have class videos stored safely, and then they can look at each other's videos and comment on them. I just thought I'd play you a tiny little clip from one of these videos. It's a sort of pre-B1 level learner, and their name is Maximo. And you'll just see the beginning of the interview that him and his partner made.
I'm Maximo. I'm from Argentina. I'm 17 years old. I go to high school and I play basketball.
Hey, Maximo, do you have some surprising culture in your country?
Yes, I think that in my culture we are like really friendly and we share a lot with every person we have near. So it's a really friendly environment to be. So that's what I think that is surprising about my country.
Okay, so I think you could hear there from Maximo that he already identified in the first little section the groups he's in. He's in a basketball group. That's a cultural group associated with the sport. He's in high school. So he's in a peer group. He said his nationality, he's from Argentina. So, and then he went on to talk about what he feels is most surprising to other people from other cultures, in this case, national cultures, about his culture. And that is the friendliness of Argentinian culture. And I think you can kind of see there, he's quite chuffed to be able to talk about his identity in this way and to be able to share it. And by putting it onto the video and uploading it onto Flipgrid, and then everyone commenting and asking each other more questions, you then get a more fun, engaging, and in-depth discussion and reveal of each individual in the classroom. And what this can do is potentially really powerful. Oh, sorry.
I'm Maximo.
Oh.
I'm from.
1 second.
And I.
A bit stuck in Maximo. 1 second, I'll just deal with that.
And I'm Maximo.
Sorry about this. I seem to be locked into something I can't get out of. I don't know why. Okay. Okay, so as I was saying, sorry about that, it can actually be super powerful to explore this diversity in the classroom. And I'm just going to take you through another example of this that a teacher friend of mine, Ree, was telling me the other day. So she had this class, I think they were, yes, intermediate level, and they were doing a listening with this lady from Turkey. And in the listening, she was talking about how Turkish people deal with different conflict situations in their daily lives and work. So this comes from English Unlimited, this material. And in English Unlimited, they have a regular, every unit, a section called Across Cultures. And so it's a good book to get hold of if you're interested in experimenting with any of these ideas. But in this particular one, they listen to Signum talking about how Turkish people deal with conflict. They look at a bit of language, then they have this discussion. So it starts off personalized with questions 1 and 2, and then gets more. Questions 3 and 4 ask you to explore your own culture a little bit, and then consider other cultures you know. And what's quite interesting is it says, is it acceptable in this country? But now we could say, is it acceptable in your family? Is it acceptable in your basketball group? We can really go down into the personal and individual cultures of our learners. But anyway, in this lesson, what happened was the students took the conversation even further themselves because they were kind of fascinated by it. And they got to talking more generally about themselves as individuals in response to other learners. And she said she started hearing them saying things like, if if I don't make that much eye contact with you, how does it make you feel? Or what do you expect of me when blah, blah, blah? They started asking each other about the behavior they've seen amongst each other and how that might come across, or how that might be seen by the other person, and what the expectation of the other person was. So it really started going down into the nitty-gritty of that, what we would call communication, intercultural communication. And in that particular class, it was a multilingual class, and one of the learners said this at the end. So that's incredible, isn't it? When a learner comes up to you and says that, and it says a lot about why it might be useful to explore our cultural diversity. By getting learners to investigate in this way, it uncovers all this richness of our backgrounds and the diversity, as you heard, of the perspectives of the learners. And by sharing that, it creates these more meaningful and respectful interactions in the long run, where learners start learning from each other and valuing each other more. In other words, it creates an inclusive classroom and promotes cultural understanding. And this is a fabulous thing to do in your own classroom. But how about for the learner themselves, for their life skills? It could have really incredible impact. It could help develop what we call an intercultural competence. And I think that is something that I think is talked a lot about these days as something we want to be installing or developing in our learners. Because, of course, the majority of people in this world that speak English, okay, are from a whole range of cultures, and the people they speak with are from a whole range of cultures. So, that could be maybe on social media, that could be in a work context, that could be just taking in information like watching films in English, but watching films set in, say, India or Bangkok, but in English language. I think it's becoming really, really important for our learners to be able to participate in this intercultural world and to acknowledge as well the diversity of their own culture. So let's have a think. If this is what developing intercultural competence does, let's have a listen perhaps to a teacher talking about one component of intercultural competence. So we're going to listen to Anna now. And she's a teacher based in the UK. What's the main point she's making?
I would say preparing students for cross-cultural communication is very important, because language is more than just the words or phrases that exist, but how they're used and in different contexts. For example, if you're going to travel to the UK and you're going to be talking to people, then you need to be aware of cultural norms and ways in which people approach conversations. Even a very casual conversation could be a minefield if you just have kind of phrases in isolation and you haven't been made aware of things like asking how someone is might not necessarily be a genuine question, but more of a greeting or something that's polite to do to acquaintances, but could maybe not require a detailed rundown of exactly your physical condition in that moment. So if a student is not aware of that, they could encounter problems when traveling to a different culture.
Okay, so the main point there, I think, Anna's trying to put across is that if we have knowledge about somebody else, their culture, in this case, she's making a point about national culture, but also other cultural groups that they belong to and identify with, then we can understand any differences that might occur as we communicate with that person. And so knowledge is a key component of intercultural competence, and it's one that I think teachers are very aware of. But what are the others? Here's a nice diagram I found. I particularly enjoyed this diagram, but it was nice and clear. So we've got knowledge here, and over here we've got skills. So if knowledge is knowing things about people, the skill is the ability to listen, observe, analyze, utilize that knowledge and adapt to various situations. And another component is attitudes. It's all very well knowing stuff. It's all very well being able to analyze the situation. But if you then shut down, blame somebody else, or, try to persuade them that your way is right, your attitude is not going to foster that effective communication. So what we need to foster in our learners with each other, and of course outside the classroom and in the interaction they have in English, is a curiosity and openness of respect and a tolerance of ambiguity. And if we do all of those things, then what happens inside the learner is sort of an internal transformation. The learner will become more flexible, more adaptable, have more empathy, and have, as it says here on the slide, an ethno-relative perspective, which is a grand way of saying they have the basic understanding that their own cultures and culture is but one of many valid world views. And having this understanding begins with the stage of an acceptance of difference, where the learner recognizes and appreciates cultural differences on all of those layers that we talked about before. Gender, for example, peer culture and subgroups within peer culture, local regional culture, that kind of thing. And once we have this acceptance and we have this recognition and appreciation of difference, we can then respond positively and with curiosity, and our communication will be more effective. Which of course therefore leads us to this fifth component, which is the external outcomes. The ability therefore to behave and communicate effectively to achieve your goals in a diverse environment. So that is intercultural competence. And that's what we can, by exploring our learners' culture in our classrooms and exploring the learners' culture so that they gain more self-awareness of their culture and their cultural group memberships. And then exploring that in the mirror reflection perhaps of other people in the lesson, and perhaps wider mirror reflection of resources that we bring into the classroom from perhaps other subcultures and groups. That whole reflective process will promote this intercultural competence. It sounds very grand, but actually it's simpler than you think. We've talked a little bit earlier on about knowledge with that example from English Unlimited, with the how you deal with conflict, how I deal with conflict. And also with the example with the hexagon shapes, where they explore the layers of their own subcultures. But let's talk a little bit about skills. So what could we do in the classroom to help develop the skills of intercultural competence? Do put any ideas in the chat. Handily, and this is really, really handy, there's a teacher and trainer and educator I know called Chia Swan Chong, and she's written this great book a few years ago now called Successful International Communication. So it's dealing with all of these communication skills, and there's a lot of books out there. But in Chia's book, what's particularly effective is it's based around a model she calls the ADAPT model. And this model and the activities in the book really help learners to self-reflect, to compare, to find alignment with each other. So ADAPT is an acronym, and this is what it stands for. So we've got A for awareness. So awareness of what you're communicating and you want to communicate, and how you're feeling about that communication, and what are your expectations of that communication, and what you think your partner's expectations, and these are often cultural expectations, and what you think they might be thinking of you. Without that awareness, we can't really develop that skill of intercultural competence. And let's not get stuck in nationality. The way in which my family, my sister and my mum and dad communicate with each other is very different, what's acceptable, to the way in which perhaps other families communicate with each other. So in those cultural subgroups, we have different communication codes and different communication norms or customs. So, for example, in my family, it's just not acceptable. It's just not acceptable to show emotion. I'll leave you to ponder that. The D is for don't judge. And so here, once we've become aware of a phenomena in a communication with somebody, it's very easy, I think, not consciously but subconsciously, to start blaming someone. Yeah. And you can blame someone, or you can start blaming yourself and beating yourself up about the situation. It's easy, I think, to jump to conclusions and not really take into consideration any cultural bias, and which is often unconscious, or potentially prejudice that you weren't aware you had, or stereotyping that might affect your understanding of a particular situation. And with our learners, you know, who are also human like us, it's often the case that, you know, you might, the inclination to judge is quite writ large at first. And interestingly enough, when I gave you that example from the class about dealing with conflict, the teacher, when she was telling me about it, said, previously to that lesson, the learners had been judging each other's behavior and putting it down to difference in personality, and he's just a rude person because he interrupts all the time. But once they had that lesson and started understanding the cultural significances and norms and customs of dealing with conflict, and they were much more less likely to judge. The third A is for analyze. So here it's that analyzing and exploring what is happening and why, and thinking about, okay, if you don't know why, how can you find out? How can you deepen your understanding? The P is for persuade yourself. So that is actually just sort of saying to yourself, what part of myself can relate to what this person is doing here? Okay, trying to access different parts of yourself, different parts of your cultures, and think, oh, you know, oh, actually, I can relate to that if I think about it in terms of how I communicate with my boss, or how I communicate, that's my work culture, or how I communicate with, you know, a friend of a friend, so someone outside of my friendship group. And the last one is for T, for try. Pretty self-evident, but that is after you've persuaded someone and you've tried to relate more closely to, or align more closely to where they're coming from, is maybe to try to change the way you think about something, try to be more open, and try to be able to behave differently because of your understanding of the situation, largely being probably culturally influenced, as opposed to it's just their personality, and be true to your personality. So have your personality, but be able to understand your own culture and how it influences you. So I think the message with try is, you know, be flexible. Your culture is not your personality. So think about that and give things a go. Okay, so that's the sort of the adapt model, but what does that look like in a class? We're going to try one of Chia's activities. Oh, by the way, there's a QR code if you want to know more about Chia and her book. So let's have a go at one of Chia's activities. And here I'd like you to use the chat function. So hands on the keyboard. Imagine yourself, I'm going to put some situations here in a moment. Which of the situations would you consider to be a loss of face for you, and which ones would upset and worry you? And as you do this task, I want you to think about the task is in a business context, okay? But as you do this task, I want you to have a think, you know, why it would upset and worry you. Think on a little bit of a deeper level. What's influencing your upset and worry? If you're not sure what loss of face is, it's simply means a situation in which you feel like you've lost the respect of the people around you. Perhaps you feel therefore a bit foolish or humiliated. Perhaps you feel your reputation is damaged in some way. So here we go. Here are the situations. Into the chat, choose a situation and just write down how you'd feel. Any ideas? How would you feel in any of those situations?
We've lost your slide, Melissa.
Okay, let's try it. How's that?
Yep, that's back.
Okay, well, the odds are that you would probably feel in some situations more upset and worried than in others. And let's imagine you had a group of learners and you were doing this task with them. If you don't teach business English, but it's quite easy, I think, to change the scenario for a group of teens into their high school peer group and a school setting. So let's imagine you do this task with your learners and they exchange their similarities and differences. What would upset, worry, lose face for them and why? You can then do several things. You can then change the setting again and put it into a family setting and see if the incident that prompts a loss of face is different. So in other words, in our different cultural groups, do we have different levels of tolerance for loss of face and why? You could obviously change it into more high stakes situation, if you like as well. Or you could lower the stakes of the situations as well. But by doing all of this, what you're really asking learners to do is to explore themselves. And you're working with that exploration of who am I? How do I feel? What behavior does this elicit? And where does this come from? And that is the essence of exploring culture, your own culture in the classroom. Then, of course, once they've done that, you could group them up. And as a group, they could attempt to analyze why other people feel differently to them. And then you could take it a step further. They could perhaps make a poster of, in one of these situations, how they could explore ways of giving face rather than losing face, in order to cultivate maybe a relationship, a better relationship here in a work situation, in the team, in the family, perhaps amongst the siblings, in order to build that kind of trust and cohesion that is helpful. And then they could perhaps present their poster. So that's one of Cheer's activities, which I've done quite a few times in class, and which I found has really worked, and I would definitely recommend getting a hold of her book, in particular if you teach higher level classes, and in particular if you they are often in work contexts. So particularly if you teach a bit of business English, but as you can see, they can be quite the situations, and they can be quite adaptable. Okay, so we've looked a little bit about teaching skill as one of the aspects of intercultural competence. I think there's 2 questions in the Q&A so far. So why don't we stop? I'll stop sharing, and let's see if I can maybe answer the questions so far, and take a little break, like 1-minute mind break. All right, Alan?
Yes, sure. Can you access the Q&A, or do you want me to tell you what's there?
Oh yeah, I'm in.
Okay.
D for don't judge. So we're in the adapt model. D for don't judge. But isn't it a human attribute to be critical? Otherwise, we can't differentiate between what is right and what is wrong. That's a great point there. And I think, in a sense, of course, when we're talking about when we're seeing the world in the sort of black and white of like morally right, morally wrong, then of course judgment is fairly inevitable. But if we explore perhaps where that judgment is coming from, we might be able to realize that it's not always that black and white. Often, sort of in a Gestalt sense, there's a sweet spot in the middle where you'll find people can meet, and therefore, without losing their sense of self or losing their moral self, but they can find an alignment in which they can communicate. And so criticism without examination of where your criticism is coming from means that you'll be in your bubble and the other person will be in their bubble, and you'll never be able to dine together across this sort of divide. And if we think about what that means, let's say if you have children, we think about that, what you have 2 children and they won't try to see each other's perspective. That has consequences. If you have students in a class that won't try to see each other's perspectives, that has consequences. So we're not saying don't be critical, as in be critical, think about it, but also think about your biases, often cultural biases, that possibly might cloud your judgment and result in blame. So that really is about maybe an attitude to and an open-mindedness to different perspectives. I'll take another question from the chat. This question just says 5.
Yeah. Most of the responses to the loss of face question opted for number 5. There were others as well, but the majority for 5, which was the one about not knowing the answer in front of other people, which is perhaps significant coming from teachers.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Do you know what? I think that is a really interesting point. And I remember when I first started teaching, it used to preoccupy me an awful lot. What if a learner asks me a question about grammar and I can't answer it? And now I do a lot of teacher training. What if a teacher asks me a question about methodology and I can't answer it? What if someone else can answer it and I look stupid? And that's quite interesting. I mean, I'd be interested to know from people in the chat if we took a step out of ourselves and analysed what's the real fear being played out here, and what aspect of your culture makes it you feel like you might be being judged in that situation. It's worth reflecting on. Maybe put some ideas in the chat. And then another question. Yes, excellent. Nobody is supposed to know everything, quite right. The answer's easy. I don't know, nobody knows everything. Let's check, come up tomorrow and discuss what we found. Right, exactly. And I suppose, yes, the feeling of being a fraud. For sure. That kind of imposter syndrome. But it's still a loss of face. So, okay, well, let's explore that situation a little bit further then. So, it's a loss of face. It makes you feel like you've lost respect, right? But have you ever asked your learners in that situation whether or not that's how they feel about it? Because I have. And actually, it was a surprising thing they told me. They told me that actually it's perfectly logical that I wouldn't know all of the grammar rules. And if I had to check something, that was fine. So what's interesting about that scenario is there's a feeling or a sense of feeling or emotion around loss of face that possibly comes from the way a particular culture, maybe your family culture, or maybe your national culture, I don't know, looks at face, and but potentially your students aren't seeing it in the same way. I think it's an interesting question, isn't it? I think it's definitely worth asking your students about, and it could well depend on the age group of your students, I think, as well as their individual subcultures, what they think. Okay, should we continue, Alan?
Yes, sure.
Okay, all right, we'll take a little break there, and we'll come back to this. So we've looked at a little bit at intercultural competence in terms of skills. Let's have a little listen to a teacher, Eve, talking about this. And she's talking about cultural knowledge and attitude, which was, as you might remember, another key component of intercultural competence. And as you listen to Eve, maybe you could think, well, do you do similar things? You probably do. And does it make you think of more ideas of what you could probably do? Okay, so.
I personally try not to take it for granted that all of the students will be aware of the other cultures, other traditions, other religions. For example, last week I was teaching a pre-intermediate class and one of the students mentioned halal food, and I could tell that a South Korean was looking quite confused. So I asked if they knew the meaning of the word and they didn't. So I got the original student to explain the meaning. And I think it's important to, as I said, not take it for granted that everybody understands these cultural practices. And I think the classroom is the perfect environment to get the students to open up and teach each other, do little presentations. I encourage them to ask questions as much as possible. And I try to get the students to give the answers rather than me, because they know more about their cultures and religions than I do.
Okay. Perhaps you want to put in the chat if you do anything similar to Eve. She talked about giving presentations. She talked about, instead of being the only person with the knowledge in the room about cultural or religious or other subgroup differences, about giving the learners the platform to be the person who gets to analyze and explain and put across their culture or cultures to each other. And by doing that, she's helping her learners develop a reflection on themselves and then an open attitude to others. And that occurs because what you're asking the learner to do by reflecting on themselves and their cultural attitudes and analyze those and think about where they're coming from, and then key thing, explain them clearly to someone else. You start bringing what is subconscious into the conscious level. So things that values that you've automatically assumed are right suddenly become conscious and explain to other people, and then they're explaining theirs to you, and you can discuss them together, the learners can discuss them together, and as a resultant direct consequence of that, you might start seeing each other in a different light, even though perhaps on the face of it, you might have quite opposing values come out from the subconscious to conscious layer. You'll find that the learners themselves start to become a bit more broad-minded. Oh, you see it that way. How interesting. I've never thought about it like that. And that's this cultural attitude being developed, this kind of opening up. So we've talked quite a lot about intercultural competence, and we've looked at ways in which we can develop this. And I think now what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about materials. Okay. So I'm just going to skip forward a little bit and ask you a question. Everybody yes or no in the chat. Do you have a course book? If you use a course book or a syllabus, do you think it represents your learners' cultures? So let's have a little yes or no in the chat on that question. Ashley. It does in Qatar. Great, that's amazing. Yes, not much, says Sarah. To some extent, yeah. So one of the things we might consider then is the diversification of the material in the course book so that it's more representative of your learner's culture. And we might consider that simply because if a learner doesn't see themselves or their maybe lived experience or their culture in the material that they are digesting and working with in English, then it might not resonate with them. And if it doesn't resonate with them, that will impact on engagement, on the meaningfulness of what's being communicated and talked about in the classroom. So I've got a little clip here from a teacher, and this teacher is called Jess, and she talks a little bit about a simple thing that she does to adapt her course book or course books that she uses. So have a little listen and see what she says. What does she adapt and why?
So generally, the pictures in many course books are, I think it's changing now, but often it's that the lack of diversity can be partly with gender. So often if it's about jobs, the doctor and the engineer are represented by images of men, and then the nurse or the teacher or something is a woman. Also with color as well. So there are a lot of white people in course books. I think that's changing a little bit. They're trying to add a more diverse pool of names to the people that they're talking about. And sometimes with the pictures as well, we can see different kind of cultural representations. But generally, I think it's not that diverse. So usually if I'm using pictures of people specifically as part of a lead-in, then I'll choose my own so that I feel that there's more of a representation, because especially with people from different religions as well, I think that's not as represented. And then, yeah, with gender as well. So I think even that can take a while, because even Google's still really biased. So even trying to find a picture of something that you just want to show the students really quickly, you have to be quite specific with your search, which is ridiculous, to try and find something that isn't, that has a bit more diversity. So yeah, I'll usually adapt the book if I feel that the students won't really be able to relate to this stereotype.
Okay. So yeah, it's really the images for Jess, right? So that literally her learners see themselves in the images in the course book. So my question to you, I suppose, is what other relatively quick fixes have you made to your course book material, or could you make, so that your learners can see themselves and their multi-cultures represented? And I think the key thing with this question is quick fixes, because often we're required to cover the material in the course book or the syllabus. Often there's exams, although it's quite possible to bring in other things to engage your learners. There's often not the time or space in the syllabus to do so. So what quick fixes, maybe put them in the chat, have you made to your course book material so your learners can see themselves and their multi-cultures represented? So I'm going to just give you a little easy quick fix that I like doing. So when you open your course book and think, how are my learners going to connect to this? Okay. Well, the quick fix is to go back to the hexagons and leverage the different layers of culture that your students do have exposure to. And we can do that by thinking, accessing maybe their subgroups. So maybe you can all be familiar with the, we're in a maybe pre-intermediate level, and the grammar point is used to and would. And often a course book will display a picture from, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years ago, and a picture of the modern day. It might be a family from 70 years ago, a family in the modern day. And of course, you know, your learner can relate to the modern day family, but how do you access them relating to the old picture? Well, perhaps you ask this question. What would your grandma think about this? Has she told you, or was there anything similar in your area, in her day? So accessing the fun stories and anecdotes from the family culture and subgroup. Here's another example. You open up your elementary course book and it's the food unit, and there's a restaurant that it doesn't really look like any restaurant your young kids would in your class would go to. And you think, well, how would that resonate with them? And you haven't got time to change all this material. So you access maybe a scenario with one of their cultural subgroups by asking the question, would the people in your football club think this is a good place to eat out after winning a match? Why? Why not? Len, here's another one. Here we are, we opened up our course book again and we're like, oh my God, it's the transport system. And we're just learning about traffic jams and blah, blah, blah. Perhaps we could brighten up and help more resonance happening by asking, if a tourist came to your town, what cultural complications would they experience on the transport system? Or if you're teaching kids, you might say, if an alien came to your town. Okay. So that's asking them to see their culture from an outsider's perspective. And there's one more here. The old lesson, you open it a course book and it's a lesson on advice. Maybe the scenario is, you know, you should do this. Why don't you do this? And the advice in the course book just doesn't, the context or the advice in the course book does, you're thinking, well, oh, my students won't really care. They won't care about this, but you haven't got time to change the book. So you access a subgroup. For example, can you see your parents following this advice? Can you see your school principal following this advice? What about your neighbor? What about the president of your country? What about your worst enemy? Would they follow this advice? Okay, so there, what we're doing is, again, we're getting our learners to think outside of maybe their immediate selves, their personalities, what they want to think, but in accessing course book material from the perspectives of, you know, people they know, and people they will therefore have a shape or a view of how they might respond in certain situations. And it's a really quick fix and a top one that I think you could go for. I'm going to give you another suggestion, perhaps, but this one is really more connected to perhaps how do you get to know more about your learners, cultural groups? How are you going to get them to let you in? So this is an idea from a colleague of mine who teaches Welsh. That's a language, and her name is Laura Jenkins. And with her classes, she creates a Pinterest board, and she asks them to access it, things in Welsh, maybe, for example, on social media, or Spotify, if it's music, or, you know, it could be like a trailer for a film. The things that they would usually access, the things that that are not just interests to them, but yeah, possibly part of their cultural subgroups. And she gets them to post them on the board. So if you look at this board here, maybe you can see what kinds of things might resonate with these students who are learning Welsh. So it immediately becomes quite apparent, doesn't it? We've got like football, that's really standing out for me here. We've got some TikToks here. We've got information on travel in Wales here. And up the top here, we've got, yes, and maybe some Welsh bands, it would seem. So we've automatically been able to identify some of our learners' cultural groups. And then, of course, when you've got more than one learner posting and they start going, oh, they've put this up. Oh, I wouldn't usually listen to that. Maybe I'll listen to that song. Or, oh, they're interested in this. Wow, that's interesting. I didn't realize that's not something that I'd be necessarily interested in. But because it's on the Pinterest board, they start to analyze what they are influenced by, what other people are influenced by culturally. And this, again, promotes this reflective and reflexive attitude, which would hopefully build tolerance and empathy amongst members of the class. Plus, and the biggest win for this, for Laura, is that she has material now which she could choose to use maybe for 5 or 10 minutes every other lesson with her learners that they have already told her they're interested in. For example, maybe the TikTok, in this case, in Welsh language. So that's just another activity and tip that I would recommend you do with your learners. Okay, so I'm quite conscious of the time. So I'm going to stop sharing the presentation here. There's other aspects that we haven't looked at. For example, we haven't really looked at the link between language and culture. I'm sure as language teachers, you're well aware that in fact, perhaps it's not even possible to teach language without the culture that's behind it. I thought I might end on a little clip related to that, which is a clip of a colleague of mine, Danny, teaching 6 students who share the same language to an extent because they all speak Arabic, though different types of Arabic, and are from a variety of places: Saudi, Libya, Yemen, Oman, and how he's using a translation task to explore culture. So bear with me while I just load that up. Here we go. Are you ready? So what you're going to see here is the teacher has put some idioms actually on the board in Arabic, and the learners have translated them into English. Okay. And then in feedback, there's a group discussion with the teacher about the translation. And here I think you'll see perhaps how animated the learners are in arguing over about not just the language, but the culture.
The best way to the main and the Boston machine. Maybe write these down. Maybe write these down.
Tell me what the first one was.
The first. Eat lunch.
Eat lunch and rest.
Lay down.
Yeah, lay down.
I think we say lie down. Eat lunch and rest, or eat lunch and lie down.
And eat dinner. And have a walk or have fun. Something like that.
It's fine.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, eat dinner and walk. But yeah, eat dinner then have a walk. Yeah. Why does this expression? Because I don't think we have any expression like this in British English, British sort of culture. What?
I think the meaning of the example, if you want to relax of your life, do this. Just eat lunch and relax and eat dinner and go walk. It's meaningful. Relax.
Oh, so nothing about health.
No,
That's only about health.
Oh, is it? Oh, right. You disagree. Oh, okay. Oh, so you think it's just sort of for feeling good?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But you.
It's about because if you eat your lunch, you take healthy. That's that problem, I think. And if you take your dinner, you have to walk before you sleep.
Right.
Yes.
I see. Okay. So you could, but it's not have a nap. It's just
Yes.
lie down.
After your lunch,
Yeah.
you take a nap.
So like a siesta.
But
In Spanish, they have a siesta. They
Yes.
eat and then they spell. Don't think they
Yes,
eat
they
so much.
think in
Oh, I'm sorry. You didn't see that. It's because I can't see the chat when I'm sharing. So I didn't realize you couldn't see it. Let's try again. Okay, have a look at this.
the best way to the main
dinner and
the Boston machine. Maybe write these down. Maybe write these down.
Tell me what the first one was.
The first.
Eat lunch and rest.
Lay down.
Yeah, lay down.
I think we say lie down. Eat lunch and rest, or eat lunch and lie down.
And eat dinner. And have a walk or have fun. Something like that.
It's fine.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, that's sort of they're both the same for me as a translation. This one sounds like eat dinner and walk with a capsa burrito. Yeah, eat dinner and walk. But yeah, eat dinner then have a walk. Yeah. Why does this expression? Because I don't think we have any expression like this in British English, British sort of culture. What?
I think the meaning of the example, if you want to relax of your life, do this. Just eat lunch and relax and eat dinner and go walk. It's meaningful. Relax.
Oh, so nothing about health.
No,
That's only about health.
Oh, is it? Oh, right. You disagree. Oh, okay. Oh, so you think it's just sort of for feeling good?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But you.
It's about because if you eat your lunch, you take it healthy. That's problem, I think. And if you take your dinner, you have to walk
before you. Right,
Yes.
I see. Okay, so you can, but it's not have a nap. It's just
Yes.
lie down.
After your lunch,
Yeah.
you take a nap.
So like a siesta.
But
In Spanish, they have a siesta. They
Yes,
eat and then they well, I don't think they eat so
they
much
take
anymore.
Okay. Bless them. Did you hear it this time?
Yeah, the sound wasn't very clear, but I think I think it came across.
Okay. Yes. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Okay. Oh, a genuine way to connect to culture. Yeah, through the language. And it was quite interesting. They had students there had quite different interpretations of that idiom because, of course, you know, they had different subcultural groupings amongst them. Great, best way to build a rapport. Yeah, I mean, I think you could really see there was a lot of engagement there, and certainly very educational, I think, you know, for them to see that, for the teacher, I think, to find out a little bit more about, you know, their perspectives, just on basically on an idiom and what it might be saying. What's the message of the idiom? Okay, I'm going to leave it at that, because I'm aware that we've come to the end of our time. But if is there a quick question or anything that I could answer? I'm very happy to answer that now. So otherwise, I'll just say thank you very much.
We haven't got any outstanding questions, Melissa. Thank you very much. Really nice balance of principles and classroom application of theory and practice. I particularly like the implication of the Pinterest activity with Welsh, because it was a very vivid reminder that cultures are not homogeneous. They're not essentialist, that they break down into all sorts of fascinating subcultures, mini cultures. And I think that came across throughout. So many thanks once again. The recording, as we mentioned, will be available. Melissa will also make her presentation slides available. Our colleague Amira Gomar from the British Council Cairo several times in the chat, so you should have picked it up by now. There's a link to a feedback survey. If you complete that, you'll get an automatic link to a downloadable certificate of attendance. So that should be clear for everyone. Can I also, just before we finish, just remind you that you have the opportunity to submit a little assignment, which I know Melissa will be very happy to give you feedback on. And this should be in the form of some kind of teaching plan. It could be a lesson plan. It could be a plan for a sequence of activities, or a plan for a project, but some kind of application of one or more of the ideas contained in this afternoon's webinar. So thank you all very much for your attention. I hope you found the webinar useful, and look forward to hearing from some of you in the future. Thanks again, and thank you once again, Melissa.
Thank you very much. And